Hello, my name is Jeffrey Nicholas. I'm an Associate Professor of Philosophy at Providence College. This is one in a series of lectures on Alasdair MacIntyre's Dependent Rational Animals, and we are covering Chapter 10 in this lecture. I invite you to view the previous lectures if you've not done so, and we have several lectures to go after this one as well. So we've been talking about what's necessary to become an independent practical reasoner. And that requires the ability to be able to step back from our present desires and evaluate those desires, and also step back from our reasons and evaluate those reasons, and maybe change the reasons we have or change the desires that we have. And last time we talked about having a different motivational set going forward. And of course, all of this requires being engaged and involved in relationships of giving and receiving, and involved in various social practices and communities. And what we learned is that throughout the process, we need a variety of virtues, some of which we have looked at. In this chapter, MacIntyre is looking at what he calls virtues of acknowledged dependence. And if you recall from the beginning of the book, MacIntyre says that for too long, philosophers and philosophy have left aside the discussion of vulnerability of human animals, and we need to reconsider what changes if we take account of that vulnerability. And certainly part of what we need to take account of are the kinds of virtues that are necessary for maintaining those relationships of giving and receiving for the kind of animals we are, for dependent animals that are also rational. And so we're looking at really two particular virtues in this chapter, although they, I guess you could say, proliferate into other virtues as well. So what are the virtues of acknowledge, or why do we need these virtues? Well, recall that human flourishing equals exercising the powers of our specific human species. So in particular, that would be our powers of practical reasoning and theoretical reasoning, but we could also think about our creativity and other types of powers that we have, language, etc. So if that's what human flourishing is, developing and exercising those powers, what is needed? Well, we need to be able to be independent practical reasoners so we know when and how to exercise those powers. And of course, being a practical reasoner is one of those powers. And so to be a practical reasoner, we need those networks of giving and receiving, and those required certain kinds of virtues of acknowledged dependence. So humility might be one, friendship, etc. So we want to think about these kinds of things in relationship to how they help us to exercise particular powers of the human species, some of which we've looked at through this lecture series. So we need to be educated in the virtues then, right? And this involves educating our emotions and educating our dispositions. So obviously it's true that in any particular situation, we're not in control of our emotions or our emotional reactions. Those are often immediate. You read on Facebook that someone that you care for passed away, and you have an immediate emotional reaction, or you're in a car accident and you have this other immediate emotional reaction. So it's not about the particular moment necessarily that we're talking about. Rather, it's about cultivating particular emotions and to feel certain ways in certain situations, right? So the idea within the Aristotelian tradition that MacIntyre is following, that St. Thomas Aquinas followed, and that many have followed throughout their lives and over the millennium, is that we can train ourselves to have the proper emotions at the right time and in the right situation. So again, this goes back to that idea that when we're born, we have particular kinds of desires, and what we're doing is we're training ourselves to be able to step back from those desires and evaluate them and perhaps change them. And so, of course, part of what we're doing is changing those emotions, because what we want to do is to be able to act from inclination at the right moment and in the right time, so that if we are in the hospital visiting a parent or a friend or someone that we care about, we're there because we have a desire to be there, not because it's some duty that we're kind of performing, okay? And so that means educating our dispositions, our attitudes, and our habits in terms of engaging the world, right? And so what we're doing is trying to learn how to perform a variety of different feelings and actions in particular types of situations. Now, if you think about any practice, for instance, karate or tai chi or something of that sort, you realize that what we're doing in those practices is we're educating ourselves to have particular emotions. I actually think this comes out much better in the Cobra Kai series than it does in the original Karate Kid movie. Because what you see in the Cobra Kai series are people really dealing with the kinds of emotions that they have. So Johnny in particular is struggling with the kinds of emotions he has and trying to evaluate those emotions and develop and to have different kinds of emotional sets and motivational sets. But you also see that in the way that Mr. Miyagi teaches Danny in the original movie. And you can think about any practice. We can talk about dance or football or whatever, right? And one of the things we might have to learn is not to react with anger, or we might have to learn not to let disappointment control us, right? And so it's learning dispositions and learning emotions. This is not something that's new or kind of fantastical that McIntyre is thinking about. It's rather something that's very human that the capitalist nation-state liberalism that we live in tries to get us to forget. So then one of the virtues that we need is what the Lakota call Wa-chon-toeg-nah-kah, right? Which McIntyre is translating as just generosity. And so he's saying, McIntyre that is saying that the terms justice and the terms generosity don't capture what the Lakota mean by Wa-chon-toeg-nah-kah, because justice, it seems like you could do that without being generous, and generosity seems like you could do that without being just. And that would not be true upon the Lakota understanding of the virtue of Wa-chon-toeg-nah-kah, right? And for the Lakota, what this means is recognizing particular responsibilities to others, including the family and tribe, and expressing that through a participation in various ceremonial acts. If you've read any of the biographies of Crazy Horse, a great Lakota warrior, you know how he was trained to practice this virtue, and so he would come back from a raiding party and he would have all these horses, and of course that would make him a rich person by our standards, right? But what he does is in various ceremonial acts give these horses to those who are in need within his particular tribe or social grouping. Okay, and I invite you to maybe read some history of the Lakota to kind of understand how this virtue is practiced, so that we might better understand how it might be practiced among ourselves. And again, part of what we're doing is we're getting away from the idea that relationships are relationships of exchange, and that reciprocity is something that can be strictly quantified and equalized between people. So, Wancantognaka means being part of a community, and that we have to recognize that we are members of more than one community. You might be a member of your family, as well as your church, and a school, or your work, and a karate club, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so you're moving between these communities all the time, and you have to be aware of that and be aware of the people that you are in relationships with, okay? And so part of what we're doing is learning this just generosity within community settings, okay? Now, that doesn't mean that we are excluding strangers. In fact, what Wa-chon-toeg-nah-kah means is having a hospitality that is due to the stranger who's coming into the community. And of course, we are all aware of the various forms of hospitality that the First Nation peoples of America extended to and practiced with the white people from Europe, and how those were used against them. And now we have the kind of social situation that we do now, where Native Americans are 1% of the population. of this country, and they are living in some of the poorest parts of the country. The land that was taken from them supports all of the sorts of things that we do, and they see nothing from that. Okay. But the idea here, to get back to this concept of just generosity, is that the virtue extends beyond the boundaries of the community, so that it really stretches out those boundaries, and who we consider a part of the community becomes a larger, encompasses more and more people. Now, another virtue that we often don't think about is that of misericordia, which means responding to urgent and extreme need of others without regard to the person. So not only doesn't matter that whether this person is a stranger or a family member or someone within the community, but it also doesn't matter what kind of judgments we might be thinking about the person. If a person is in extreme need, urgent and extreme need, it doesn't matter if we think they are a criminal, or if we think that they're lazy, or whatever many reasons that we hear every day in popular news media, particularly on the right, but even on the left, about how we should react to people who are deemed lazy. Right? So rather, what's important is that we respond to urgent care, because in fact we ourselves have been in need of urgent and extreme care, and we might need that again in the future, right? And so this involves developing an ability to grieve and feel sorrow over someone else's distress, insofar as that distress, right, becomes my own. So it's not simply about recognizing it, but understanding that distress is my own. And in this way, we expand the concept of who is a neighbor. Now, for MacIntyre, misericordia is grounded in the virtue of charity, which is normally understood to be a theological virtue. But he makes an argument in this chapter that St. Thomas Aquinas did not think that charity was simply a theological virtue. He thought it was relevant in all aspects of life. And in fact, other non-religious people have spoken about charity. I have some issues with that kind of argument, but it fits in with his MacIntyre's larger focus, and we're not going to pay attention to that right now. Now, what we are going to pay attention to is the characteristics of the relationship of just generosity and misericordia. So, these are communal relationships that engage our affections. They extend beyond the community to strangers, and through misericordia, right, we respond to the urgent need that confronts the community, right? And so that might mean how our community recognizes the urgent need of other communities. Okay, underlying this is the idea that our giving must be uncalculated, right? That is, what we give to others should not be calculated in terms of what they owe to us, because it may never come to that. What should be calculated, though, is my own individual virtues, right? So am I industrious in earning money? Am I thrifty in saving? And can I discriminate in giving? Because I should not just, take the lowest paying job that I can, and I should not just spend everything that I own, but I should be willing and able to save so that I can give to those in need in the right situations. And of course, part of what this means, the flip side of the coin, is having certain virtues of receiving. Now, these are virtues that Aristotle would not have recognized. In fact, Aristotle held the idea that the good person was a megalopsychos, right? Someone who believed that he was self-sufficient and did not need to rely upon others, and was actually sad when he remembered when he relied on others. Part of what we're doing following MacIntyre is rejecting that kind of idea of the self-sufficient, the John Wayne and John McClane kind of character, and recognizing our own dependence upon others. Okay, and so we must always be prepared to support the severely disabled, because they belong to part of the community just as we do, and we are all disabled in a variety of ways because we all need others in a variety of ways. And so we need to develop those virtues of accepting that need and realizing our dependency upon others.